We say together, and so it is. Alrighty. So before we begin, I just want to apologize last week for everyone on the bridge. Apparently, it kicked everyone off except me, right in the middle of the opening treatment. So I'm sorry that happened. I posted the talk up on the YouTube channel, and if you don't have access to the YouTube channel, let me know. The link is in the email that I send out every week. So if that happens again, please just go over to the YouTube channel and pick up the talk where you left off. There is a slight delay, by the way. If you try to listen through the conference call and the YouTube channel at the same time, you're going to get a delay of several seconds from the time you hear it on the conference bridge until the time it comes through the YouTube channel. But if you do get kicked off, I apologize, but go ahead and switch over to YouTube. That has never happened in the 20-some odd years that we've been using the conference bridge. Weird things have happened, but never everybody getting kicked out at the same time. Okay? So thank you for your patience. Today we are talking, as you might have guessed from the opening treatment, about the greatest gift that we have, which is consciousness, which is awareness, which is self-awareness. The gifts have been given, but we have to open them. It's up to us. So I just want to mention a few things in getting started here that may kind of give us little stories, little visual images, things to take away with us. You know, as I said, Vernon Howard in his book Psychopictography, he says we remember the image of the story long after we have forgotten the words that go with it. This is why teachers teach in parables and little teaching stories. This is why Jesus spoke in parables about the things familiar to the people, about growing crops, about raising animals, you see, about fishing, things that people can relate to, you know. So every time they go fishing, they go, that's I remember that now. See, every time they see a shepherd and the sheep, they go, the good shepherd. I remember that now. So many years ago, and I know I've used this story before, I've told it before, but it just seems so appropriate for today. Many years ago, I might have been like 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old. There was a TV show on in New York. It was called the David Susskind Show, and it was a talk show format. You know, the Tonight Show had started. Steve Allen had started the Tonight Show, and the talk show format was kind of getting really popular. And many people, different local celebrities, had their version of it. And Susskind had a show in New York, and it was a very simple show. You know, it was on for maybe an hour late at night. And I think on Friday nights I was allowed to stay up and watch it. And he had an audience of about 500 people that sat there, and he would just bring in guests, and they would have a conversation, you know, as they do in the talk shows. So this one night, his guest was a man named Harry Lorraine, and Harry Lorraine was billed as a memory expert, you know. And he did different demonstrations of his memory. So the first thing he did was completely captured my attention as a 12-year-old boy. I always wanted to do magic tricks to impress my friends. But Lorraine took out a deck of cards, a regular deck, 52 cards, and he asked David Susskind to take any 4 cards out of the deck, any 4. Just Susskind picked 4 and he put them on his desk. And Lorraine turned the deck over so he could see the cards, and he just very quickly shuffled through with his thumb. He just very quickly slid the cards from side to side. And it didn't take him more than a minute to get done. And when he got done, he looked at David Susskind and he said, now you have and he called out the cards one at a time, called out the 4 cards. And as he called them out, David Susskind turned them over. Harry Lorraine had successfully identified the 4 cards that David Susskind took out of the deck. And Susskind said, well, how do you do that? And he says, when I looked through the cards, when I turned the deck over and I looked through the cards, I just memorized the cards as they went by. And when I got done, I went through the 52 cards that are supposed to be in the deck, and the 4 that weren't there stood out in my mind. It seemed totally incredible to me that could be done. You know, I had to had to think about that. But that wasn't the most amazing thing he did that night. Towards the end of the show, what they did was they had everyone in the audience, all 500 people, stand up. And what had happened is as the studio audience was filing into the show, Harry Lorraine stood at the door and he greeted everyone, and everyone told Harry their name. So Harry Lorraine memorized the names of the 500 people in the studio audience, but not only memorized their names, associated it with their faces. So towards the end of the show, they had all 500 people stand up, and Harry Lorraine pointed to them one at a time and called out their name. And as they called out their name, they sat down. So within a few minutes, there were a few people standing, and he looked at them and he called their names. And when he got finished, there were two people standing that he hadn't gotten their names. He said, now let me go back a little bit, and I'll just tell you one of them because it makes the point. So one of them was a lady, and she had a very round face, very sweet face, and she had big rosy cheeks. And Harry Lorraine looked at her and he said, "Oh, you're Miss Kowsorski." And she said, "Yes." And he sat down. She sat down. And then he called the other gentleman's name who was standing up, and he sat down. So David Susskind says, "How did you do that?" So Harry Lorraine says, well, he says, what I do is I look at each individual and I pick out what I will remember as a prominent feature of their face. He said, with Miss Kowsorski, it was her beautiful round face and the dimples in her cheeks. So I knew that I would remember her dimples. He says, and then her name was Kowsorski. He says, so I pictured a cow, like a cartoon cow, but not just one, millions of cows. And the cows were on skis, and the cows were skiing down the dimples, and they had a saw, like a carpenter's saw, and they were sawing the ski as they were coming down the hill. So he had cow, saw, ski, and that's how he remembered her name. So now he's about 12 years old when this happened. So many years later, Lori and I had already married, and we were watching TV one night. By this time, it was probably Johnny Carson. And sure enough, Harry Lorraine comes on that show, and he's a guest. And I'm telling Lori, I said, oh, I saw this guy on TV when I was a kid, many years ago. And I related the story I just told you to Lori. And Lori said, wow, that technique must really work because you've remembered that lady's name for over 10 years and she means nothing to you. And I said, holy mackerel. So I ran to the bookstore in Hickory, Bumgarner's bookstore, the only bookstore in town, and I ordered the book. It was, if anyone interested, the title of the book is The Memory Book by Harry Lorraine and Jerry Lucas. And as I'm reading the book, something struck me that I think relates to today. And what Harry Lorraine said is the reason that we don't remember things, people's names, facts we read in textbooks, telephone numbers. The reason that we don't remember things is that we are not originally aware of them in the first place. And that struck me. How many times have you been to a meeting or some function and you're introduced to all these people, and within a few minutes you turn around and say, now what was that person's name? See, we really weren't paying attention. We really weren't paying attention. And what Lorraine said is that the techniques that he teaches are designed to cause that original awareness, you see. So by looking at a person's face, by trying to determine the prominent feature that you will remember about their face, was it cheekbones or a high forehead or the shape of their eyes or their nose or whatever, you're paying attention. And then by creating a cartoonish figure, it can't be a reasonable, rational image. It has to be an image that is silly and exaggerated. And by trying to associate that silly image, the cow skiing down the hill, sawing the ski, trying to associate that with the feature on the face, the dimples. It's forcing original awareness. And what Lorraine was saying is that the way that memory works, now according to him, the way that memory works, the way that the mind works, is in images, not in words. Now I'm sure that may be different for different people, but this was his explanation. So if we try to force ourselves to remember things by repeating the words over and over again, memory by rote. Remember as a kid, you had to study for the test, and you just keep reading that chapter out loud over and over and over again. But by creating the image, because according to Harry, the image is the way that the brain recalls things, or the mind recalls things, or consciousness recalls things. By cooperating with it the way that it works, by creating the original awareness, the information is there, and it's there forever. I still remember that lady's name, and now that's some 60 years ago. So the purpose of the talk today is not to sell books for Harry Lorraine, even though it is a good book, and I recommend it, especially if you're taking any courses in school and you have things that you need to remember. But the point is, we don't always pay attention. We are not always aware. We are not always aware of what is going on around us. We are not always aware of what's going on within us. We are not always aware of the magnificence that life is. So remember that story about Harry Lorraine. Let's come over now to another parable that you've heard me use before about how, and this comes to us from the East, that when the gods created human beings, there was one secret that they wanted to keep from the human beings. And they had a meeting and they had a discussion about where to hide it. And one said, well, let's hide it in the depths of the ocean. And another one said, no, with man's curiosity, eventually they will explore even the deepest part of the oceans and find it. And another one said, well, let's put it up on the top of Mount Everest, put it on the top of the highest mountain. And another one of the gods said, no. Eventually their curiosity will take them to the top of Mount Everest, and they will find it there too. And they thought, where could they put this great secret? See, where could they put this great secret? And one of them said, I know a place that they'll never look. Let's put it within inside them, for they're always looking out there and never in here. It's there, but we're not aware of it. You see, we haven't opened it. In the email last night, I related a couple of different quotes from the New Testament, and paraphrasing them, not taking them exactly as they were given. But we have a couple of curious passages that we want to consider. And these are words that are attributed to Jesus. And in one part we're told, the gifts have already been given. The gifts have already been given. Another time we're told, it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the gifts. And another time, when the disciples were kind of asking, they're saying, you want us to come and follow you and study all of these ideas, but we're practical men. We have families to support. We have our little fishing boats and a business to tend to, and we have practical things to do here. And the response Jesus gave to them was, the Father in heaven knows what you need before you ask. Ask believing in your hearts that it is done, and it shall be done. It shall be done. And I've always found that to be a little bit puzzling, as a kid growing up. If God already knows, the Father in heaven or Spirit or the divine or whatever term you can relate to for this magnificence that has created us out of itself, if it knows before we ask what we need, why do we have to ask? Why do we have to ask? God, you know what I need, just give it to me, you see? And you'll hear people say that. And sometimes I cringe because people will be in a situation and they'll say, well, God knows better than I do what needs to be done here. So I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to leave it all up to God and it will all work out. And it's true, it will all work out. Everything always does have a way of working out. It doesn't always end well, but it works out. But I cringe because that is not the way things work. The gifts have already been given, but we have to do our part. We have to receive. We have to open them, you see. Dr. Holmes tells us this. The divine cannot do for us what it has created us to do for ourselves. The divine cannot do for us what it has created us to do for ourselves. We have a certain responsibility. We have a certain accountability. There's something that we are the only ones in our life who can do. And no one else can do it for us. Emmett Fox gave us another story, tells the same principle a different way. He said that when he came to the United States from England, he went to Manhattan and he passed a restaurant and he looked in the windows of the restaurant and there were all people sitting at tables and they had all of these different kinds of food that looked very good from outside the window. And he went in the door and he found an empty table and he sat down and he's looking all around and there's people all around him and they're all, just many different kinds of dishes, just about anything you could want. And he was sitting there waiting for a server to come give him a menu, take his order. And no one ever came. No one ever came. And he just sat there and people all around him were enjoying their meals and he couldn't understand what was wrong. So finally he went to someone at a table nearby and he said, what do I have to do to get service here? I've been sitting here for 15 minutes and no one came to give me a menu, take my order. And they said, oh, well, this is a self-service cafeteria. You have to help yourself. You just go get on the end of the line down there, you get a tray and your silverware, you walk down the line and you tell the people at the different stations what you want and they'll give you anything you want. And he got a lesson from that, you see, and he used that in his Sunday talks. He was the pastor of the First Church of Divine Science in New York City, which Ernest Holmes' brother Fenwick was the pastor before Emmett Fox came. The gifts have been given. We have been given the greatest power there is. We have been given the greatest ability there is. But we have to use it. We have to first be aware of it. Original awareness, like Harry Lorraine said. And then we have to cooperate with it the way it works. Just like creating silly images that the consciousness will remember cooperates with memory the way memory works. So if we kind of think about, why are we here? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Why are we here? How has life been set up? If I'm to discover something, what am I to discover? You know? We see this unfoldment of consciousness. Troward tells us that with every step function in evolution, there is a greater degree of intelligence, you might want to call that consciousness, and a greater degree of mobility. So we went from single-celled animals that had no means of self-propulsion, that just kind of floated around on the water, and then flippers developed and fish began to swim, you see. A greater degree of mobility. The single-celled animal had very little ability to interact with its environment. The fish could actually move and change its environment, you see. It had a certain degree of intelligence. And you can see that evolution, you can see that cleverness, you know, as you kind of move up the hierarchy of the animal kingdom. You can see the creatures who have the ability to learn. They must have memory, right? They have the ability to solve problems. Some of them have the ability to make and use tools. I saw an experiment not too long ago where they took crows. You know, now we're seeing lots of stories in the press about the intelligence of crows. Some are saying that crows are self-aware. That they are self-aware. They know themselves as a unique identity, not just part of the environment. But they took a little bit of food and put it down the end of a narrow glass tube, so far down that the crow couldn't get its beak in there. And they left a straight piece of wire nearby. And the crow eventually figured out how to bend a hook in the end of the wire, stick the wire down into the tube, hook the piece of food that was at the bottom, and pull it out and get to it. You know, problem solving. You see this greater unfoldment of consciousness, of awareness, you see, of intelligence. And we have to ask, where does it lead? Where is it going? Where did it come from? And where is it going? Now, again, we come back to kind of the two major orientations or two worldviews, the materialist and the spiritualist or transcendent. I won't say spiritualist because there's a denomination, and I'm not speaking for that denomination. I'm talking about things that are spiritual in nature. So Emerson was called the transcendentalist. So the transcendentalist believed that spirit transcended matter. Okay? So that's a good place to be, good place to start. So the materialist says that consciousness evolved from matter. Matter is the beginning, matter is the end. Matter has somehow created consciousness out of itself. And when that matter dies in the form of the organism dying, whatever consciousness was there ceases to exist. Because consciousness is simply a function that's somehow matter made of itself. The transcendental view, perhaps the mystical view, is that consciousness was involved with matter from the beginning. It was always involved with matter, and it is revealed a little more to a greater degree with each step function of evolution. The gifts have already been given. The consciousness is already there. The spiritual awareness is already a possibility. But there has to be this evolution, this unfoldment of awareness, this unfoldment of awareness. So Thomas Troward tells us to consider the four kingdoms: the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and the human. The four great step functions in evolution, if you want to call it that. And Troward, who wrote late 1800s, early 1900s, Troward said we are at the fifth kingdom. We are at the beginning of the fifth kingdom, perhaps the age of Aquarius. Now I've got the song stuck in the back of my head. We are at a new step function, but all the previous functions, all the previous steps of evolution did not require the conscious cooperation of the individuals. Evolution happened. Evolution was, according to the mystics, evolution was unfolding from perfect consciousness, and it is evolving back towards perfect consciousness. And it is doing so in a manner that allows for the development of the individual personality, the individualized expression of the one. Out of the one comes many, but the many are still part of the one. We are not separate from the one. We are not apart from the one. We are not essentially different than the one, although we are having a different experience. But we are part of the one. And what Troward tells us is that from this point forward, from the point where the individual awakens to the awareness that they are a spiritual being in a spiritual universe governed by spiritual laws, that evolution for that individual from that point on requires the conscious cooperation, the awareness, the original awareness, and the techniques, right? So Harry Lorraine gave people techniques that forced original awareness. The theory about the mind working in pictures is wonderful, but it's not even necessary for his technique to work. What is necessary is you must perform the technique. If you don't do the technique, his system cannot work for you, you see? So Thomas Troward tells us that we as individuals have stepped into the fifth kingdom. We are first kind of aware that we are more than just the skin and bones that make up our physical bodies. We start to become aware of why would Jesus say the gifts have been given. The Father knows what you need, but you still have to ask. You still have to ask. And the reason for that is divine love cannot force itself upon us. It has given us everything we needed to get to this point. But from this point on, to evolve further as a spiritual being, we must consciously cooperate. How do we do that? How do we consciously cooperate? Well, I think the first thing that we have to consider is we live in a universe governed by spiritual law. And the primary way to state that law, there's lots of different ways to state it, right? But the primary way to state that law is it is done unto you according to your belief. It is done unto you according to your belief. If you go back and read the New Testament and read the things that Jesus was telling the followers, it comes down to this, in my estimation. It comes down to this. It is done unto you according to your belief. In the Old Testament, the prophet Isaiah said, "My word shall not return unto me void." In the New Testament, it's put another way: cast your bread upon the waters, and they shall return unto you. The Stoic philosophers said, what the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. We have the secret, if you want to call it the great secret. Human beings love a mystery and we love a secret. You know, if you tell people I got a secret, they'll stop and listen. This is why some of the old teachers wrote so many books about the secret healing truth of the ages, the secret of prosperity, the secret of this, the secret of that. It catches people's attention. But the only real secret is that it is within. The power is within. The gift has been given within. We must be aware and we must cooperate. And we have techniques to do that. We have techniques to do that. So I want you to reflect upon a day, any day. Monday is a good day to reflect upon, because most people are going back to work. And it's busy, you know, it's busy. Get up in the morning, you get into your routine, you get in the car, you go to work, whatever you do, you stay home, you boot up your computer, you go to work and you get engaged and you have all these emails and you have all these things, and you are there and you are fully engaged in the busyness of the day. And how much time, what percentage of that time are you truly aware? Are you truly observing yourself and observing what's going on? And I would say for most of us, we're not aware. We're not self-aware at the time. We're not self-conscious at the time. We are busy, we are engaged, we are doing things, we are thinking about the task at hand, we are solving problems, we are making phone calls, we're writing emails, we're doing all those things. But we are not really present in that moment. We are not really present in that moment. In fact, when we're doing whatever we're doing now, we're thinking 3 steps ahead, right? How many times you make a mistake at work and you suddenly realize, well, I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, and I did this while I was thinking about that, and I made a mistake, you see. Awareness. Awareness. If we are to open the gift, we must practice awareness. We must develop awareness. So you might say in my story about Harry Lorraine that the gift of remembering anything is already here, but we must practice the technique to unlock that gift, to open that gift, to unwrap that gift. And the gift, the spiritual gift, is the conscious realization of the presence of the divine. The conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine. We don't want to just know about it, right? We want to know it by experience. We want to know it by experience. There's a difference between the knowledge that comes from learning about and the knowledge that comes from doing. And in fact, we only know what we can do. Dr. Holmes tells us this. We only know what we can do. I was sharing this with someone during the week. You know, I wanted to learn how to fly, and I read every book I could get my hands on about flying. You know, a stick and rudder was the best. I knew everything there was, I thought. I knew everything there was about how an airplane worked, how the controls worked, all of those things. And I learned on sailplanes, on gliders. So you start out at the end of a 200-foot rope tied to a crop duster, more or less, is what happens, your tow plane. And the instructor sits behind you, and the instructor says, okay, well, just kind of keep your hands and your feet on the controls and follow along with me as what I'm doing. But don't you put in any inputs. Let me fly the plane. And they start out, you know, and they take off, and you can feel the stick move back, and you can feel the nose go up, and when it comes time to turn, you feel the stick move to the side and the rudder pedal move to the side, and the plane turns. And then maybe on the next flight, the instructor starts off and you get above 200 feet above the field, which is a safe altitude for a sailplane if it has to turn back and land. And the instructor takes their hands off the controls and puts them on your shoulders and says, "Okay, it's your airplane. You got it." And it was at that very moment that I found out that I knew nothing. I knew nothing by experience about flying a plane. I knew the theory. I knew all of that. But when it came to actually implementing it, I had a lot to learn. So we want not just the theory of the idea that the divine has created us out of itself and, you know, we're all little points of light from this one source of light, or however, whatever way or shape an image comes to you that helps you to get it. We want that actual experience. We want that experience. That is the gift that we want. That is the gift that we're trying to unwrap. So the first thing that we want to train ourselves to do, the first technique, is to be aware. To be aware. Now this is just a simple technique. And if you have some type of a fitness watch, or you have something on your phone, have it beep at you every 15 minutes or so. And just ask yourself, what was just going on here? What was I just doing? What was I just thinking? Be in the moment. See, you want to develop the ability to observe yourself, as that autonomous part of yourself goes about the day doing all of the different things that you can do with your eyes closed. Imagine there's another part of yourself just observing. Now in meditation, one of the techniques that we must do, but one of the techniques is to just simply observe a thought. Now, the purpose of meditation is not to force yourself to stop having thoughts, but it helps us to stop being entangled with the thought. See, when we're entangled with the thought, we're no longer observing. We're no longer a neutral observer. We are the doer. And we want to develop the technique of observing. So one of the techniques is to sit and begin your meditation practice as you normally would. You know, close your eyes most of the way, inhale, exhale, count from 1 to 5, all those things. And then as a thought comes up, you simply say, "Oh, look, there goes a thought. There goes a thought." And then another thought comes up and you might say, "For whom did that thought arise?" Don't answer the question, just ask it. That keeps you detached from it, you see. And then a thought comes up and you say, "Who is the one observing the thought?" Who is the one observing the thought? Now, all of a sudden what that has done is that has separated you. So I am not the thinker of the thought. I'm not even sure I'm the one observing the thought, but who is the one observing the thought? See? So most of the time we go through the day and there's a thought and we say, "Oh, I had a thought, I need to do this." Now we're saying, "Oh, there goes a thought." And now we're saying, who's the one observing that thought, you see? We're stepping back. We're becoming aware. And finally, we can say to ourselves, who is the one observing the thought? Who is the one observing the thought? Now my point here is that this technique causes us to be aware. Causes us to be aware. And awareness is the first step, the first part. As Harry Lorraine said, we can't remember things that we are not originally aware of. I would say that we can't change things that we are not originally aware of. This is important. If you think about, and we're going to have to continue this next week with some more techniques, because there's so much more to explore that I don't want to leave it hanging. But if you've ever tried to break a habit, one of the things that you must do is become aware of when you are acting habitually, when you are acting out of that habit. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, they had a lot of smoking cessation classes where employers were trying to help employees who wanted to quit smoking learn how to quit smoking. And it made sense. It was good for everyone's health. It reduced their costs for health insurance, all of those things. One of the things when I was working, a lot of people went to that, and what they did was they gave the smokers a little like pencil, like a golf scoring pencil, and a little piece of paper, and that piece of paper slipped right into the sleeve of the pack of cigarettes, and it had more or less a timeline on it. It had the hours of the day, and it had a timeline on it. And what the person was supposed to do was, when they lit a cigarette, they were supposed to take that piece of paper out, and they were supposed to make a mark on the timeline as to what time of the day they had that cigarette. And that way they could go back and they could observe, there were certain trigger events, there were certain things that happened, and then they would just reach for a cigarette automatically. You get a cup of coffee, reach for a cigarette. Those kind of things. Finish a meal, reach for a cigarette. So the person who was teaching the workshops was trying to create an awareness of the habit, you see. And that is kind of the first step. They needed to become aware. Needed to observe themselves, needed to be kind of a semi-detached observer, because on the one hand they had a cigarette, on the other hand they had a pencil. But they had to become an observer of their own behavior, an observer of their own behavior. So this is important, and this is a good place to stop for today. Remember, I mentioned a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago now, the Zoom group watched an interview with Carl Jung, several interviews with Carl Jung on his ideas. And he said something that I've known, but I don't know whether I knew it from him or just something that I worked out the hard way on my own or what. But it is as if there are at least two different people inside of each and every one of us. There's the one who is conscious, and then there is the one who is functioning below the level of consciousness, the subconscious. You can call it subjective, you can call it collective conscious, you can call it lots of different things. But it means there's stuff going on that we are not consciously aware of. Stuff going on we are not consciously aware of. So what Jung said is the conscious self, the ego, the conscious self, which he called the ego, can never directly know the unconscious self. And yet most of what we do is driven, influenced by the unconscious self. Remember I told you the model of the iceberg, that we use in the self-help classes. Only 10% of the iceberg is visible above the waterline, but 90% is below. And the human mind is like that, in that 10% is known to us, but 90% is not. Now, I don't know if those percentages are correct or not. That's what we used to help people try to understand. So Jung said we don't know. We cannot directly know what that subconscious is thinking or believing. Now this becomes very important to us, because we say, when you think and believe in your heart, pray believing in your heart, you see, it shall be done. Most of what we believe is unknown to us. This is why people say, I wasn't thinking about this happening to me, and yet it happened. Well, you only know 10% of what you were thinking. What was the other 90% doing? So what Jung said was we can only know what that subconscious part is thinking and believing through the symbols that it gives to us. Now, I would say, for our purpose, we can only know what that subconscious is believing based on what's outpicturing in our lives. And once again, we must become aware. Awareness is the first step. What am I doing? What am I thinking? What am I saying? And what is going on in my life at this moment? The gifts have been given, but we have to cooperate with the way the gifts were given to open them. We must pray believing in our hearts, but what is our hearts and how do we change what's in our hearts? If we wish to experience the presence of the divine, we must be aware. So techniques that help us to develop awareness are helpful. Techniques that help us to become aware of what we are believing in our subconscious or in our hearts are helpful. And techniques for changing what we believe at a subjective level are helpful. So next week we're going to pick this up. We're going to pick this up next week. We're going to talk more about specific techniques to create awareness in the moment. Awareness in the moment. Be here now. Be in the moment now. We're going to talk about observing ourselves. We're going to talk about techniques to change what we are believing at a subconscious level in order to experience the presence, the awareness of the divine within. Remember, Harry Lorraine said, if you do the technique, it works. You don't have to know. He explained how it works, his theory of it, but you don't have to know. If you do the technique, it'll work, you see. If you do the spiritual practices, the techniques, they work. You have to want to do them. Sometimes in order to have to want to do them, you have to know why you're doing them. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the how and the why. For this week, I would ask you to simply take a time where you do nothing but observe. Now, I'm not saying you just sit in a chair and do nothing, but what I'm saying is, while you're going about whatever you're going about, if you're cooking a meal, if you're mowing the grass, whatever you're doing, just imagine, just pretend that you are an observer standing next to or behind yourself, watching yourself do these things. Can you be there and observe? Who is the one doing? Who is the one observing? And see if that helps. We'll take it up again next week. So it is.